Hello and welcome to this quick video overview of some mobile UX design principles and best practices. Today's short video going through this article here by one Cameron Chapman, and she is an author here on in the UX Collective, who has written probably my favorite article when it comes to mobile UX design. I've read a lot of them over the past couple of years, and probably 20 to 30 of them. And this to me is the most straightforward, but also the most comprehensive because it covers a lot of the big points that I have encountered recently in terms of seeing bad mobile UX design specifically. Now, we are in a time when mobile websites have become the norm, and most businesses and most bloggers and most people who have websites are of the opinion, and I guess it's more of a fact, that um, mobile traffic is now more than half of all website traffic with the internet. And the way that people search on their phones and surf the web on their phones is a lot different than how people use desktops. Now, the video that I'm recording here today is on a desktop computer because I'm using Zoom and it's just a little bit easier for me technologically. But you'll see some of these examples that the author is putting out there are screenshots from mobile devices. This is not only going to be looking at mobile web, but also apps, as mobile apps are just as, have to be held to the exact same standards when it comes to UX design from the mobile side. And fun fact, I did find this interesting. In the this paragraph here, she mentioned that users are people who download apps, unless they are really financially tied to them, or they've had used them in a past scenario, like some social media applications. People are very quick to ditch apps from their phones, and we're in a day and age where people have pages and pages of apps on their phones. They're scrolling for several seconds before they can get all the way to the end of their device's mobile data. But by that same token, people are very willing typically to delete apps. And this fun fact here that she has written in here is 75% of apps that are downloaded, they're only open once. Not to say that people immediately delete them, but that you really do need to make a good first impression when it comes to developing an app. The same also applies to a website. And I would venture to argue that the mobile website design is even more important because that could impact a cross-device series of touch points that you, the business or the individual, are trying to develop. A lot of times today we see, I believe it's about 7 different touch points between a user and a brand before they decide to make a purchase or do something that is what the brand would consider to be a conversion. Now, at least 2 of those touch points are typically done on a mobile device. A lot of times it's difficult to track that because of how Google Analytics works today. However, we can assume safely that there's at least 2 touch points with brands that happen from the mobile side. That's not to say it's on the website, but there's a touch point with a brand that happens on a mobile device. So let's dig right into these best practices. First off, we start broad, putting the user first. We need to make sure that you are creating something for the user experience. And this is an important piece because when I think of problematic websites that don't work, apps that don't work, it's because that they are developed with one specific stakeholder slash decision maker, and they are not the target audience. They are different. And when you have somebody who is calling the shots, who is not in the target audience, and they are deciding that certain elements of a website need to be there, not need to be there, need to be somewhere else, you end up with a pretty poorly designed website in terms of who the audience is and how you're catering to them. So it's really important that you put the user first. That means do some user testing, try to do some sort of focus groups or anything. It can be cheap, it can be quick. It doesn't have to be much, but it's important that the audience is looking at this early on in the process, even if you are, say you're creating the website and you are also the audience. That's great, but it's also good to get some other feedback from the audience, because you never want to be the only person that's looking at something before it goes out to the masses. Now, second, we have making navigation intuitive. This is another important piece, because the way that menus are starting to look today, they're getting a little bit more convoluted. There was a time about 5 or 6 years ago where the common theme was, if you're on mobile, it's immediately going to be the hamburger menu, right? The classic three horizontal lines up in the corner. And if you're up on on a desktop device, um, it expands and it's full width, or on the sidebar or something. But on mobile, now we're starting to see sites get cute. And you have situations that can make menus a little strange. This is a really good example, because on one hand, you have this is an app, right? This is interesting down here, because this is really your kind of navigation. But also, what I found to be interesting is that this could also be a menu up here, the little four circles. And I mean, this is not a challenging navigation here. I'm just kind of showing an example where there are two different schools of thought, where on one you have the bottom kind of key menu icons, and then you also have the classic upper corner. Now, I think this is actually I think this is an app, but it's an interesting thing to see, because you want users to be able to quickly be able to move around the website pretty quickly and flawlessly. And so just making sure that you're conforming to best practices is going to be important. And that website has two options there. I think most people would use the bottom menu, because also that lower horizontal menu is pretty standard with a lot of apps today. But the key thing here is just to make sure that people recognize the icons that you use, and also to make sure that people don't have to think much about the navigation. And a lot of times the designers and the developers, they overthink it, and that means the user is going to overthink it as well when that time comes. So just stick with what you know when it comes to navigation. Next, we have the seamless experience across devices, and this is that cross-device collaboration that I mentioned earlier. If you have somebody that's going to interact with your brand multiple times before converting, whatever that is, you want to provide a consistent branding experience from one to the other. Now, in this example with the Apple computers, you see pretty much the same picture on both screens, and they're different sizes. But you also have to make sure that there is that similar brand experience being done on mobile. This can be a challenge, because a lot of websites opt to ditch the banner image on mobile devices. This is helpful because it quickens the loading time, and also banner images take up a lot of space on a cellular device, excuse me. And when we think about a consistent branding, it's not just the logo, it's the color scheme, it's the photos, and it's the messaging. Not saying that your messaging is going to be radically different on a mobile device. It should be almost exactly the same. But you can also choose to eliminate individual pieces of a website when it is on mobile. Case in point would be the first mobile website I ever designed. I was doing it on Wix, and I had a very long homepage, and I decided I need to cut something down. As a result, I ended up taking out a couple of blocks that were pretty text heavy. I thought, I don't need all this text on the mobile site. Then I realized later that those blocks were the key unique value proposition for the site. And as a result, my website did not convert at all. I was getting traffic and I was getting no conversions. And it wasn't until weeks later that I went back into my analytics and I was like, wow, I'm not getting anything out of my mobile traffic. And my mobile traffic at the time was like 75% of it. All of my new business and all of my, it was an e-commerce site, all of the purchasing was coming from desktop. And I thought, there's something wrong with mobile. I went through, checked the mobile. I was like, everything looks good. I can add to cart. I can make a purchase, put in my payment information just fine. It wasn't until I was actually taking my first MBA course, and it was a marketing class about unique. It was a marketing basics class, and it was all about the unique value proposition. And I thought, wow, that's not on my website on my phone. I'd pulled up my website. I was like, what is my unique value proposition? I had to remind myself, and I thought, that's not there. It's totally missing. I must have removed it. Now, as a result, I didn't have that key messaging that the user on the mobile device really wanted. And I was also noticing that most people on on mobile devices that were going to my website were interacting with the brand for the first time. Double whammy there. Um, After I went back and revisited the homepage, added back the unique value propositions, I saw a lot more conversions a lot more quickly. So make sure that you are creating that seamless experience, because you need to make sure that people have the opportunity to see all of your best work on all sizes of devices. Next, we have focusing on user goals. What do you want people to do on a site? Um, it can be the same on desktop and mobile. Just make sure that it's easy for people to do what you want them to do. A good thing here is, you know, looking at a bank example as she does here, saying, "Hey, a lot of banks are focusing on the login feature. But what if you're just looking for an ATM? Do you need to log in for that? You shouldn't have to. The ATM searcher should be very intuitive and very quick, very fast. And a lot of times banks hide that behind logins, which can be a big pain, especially if you don't have your login saved on your phone, which obviously many people do not. So think about it that way, not just the user goals, but you want to, when you have your mobile website and you say, if this maybe make a splash site, what are the three things that you want people to do or that people are going to do? It's not even, doesn't even have to be what you want them to do, but what do the users want to do? And if you're finding that there is a disconnect there between where the users are trying to go and where they actually go, that's going to be where you need to reevaluate, do some more user testing, reevaluate the target audience and your personas, and figure out, okay, what is it that they want to do here that I'm hindering them from doing on mobile device? Um, Next up, we have allowing for personalization. And this is a really quick one. This is just being able to choose your own adventure, being able to filter things on something like a map quickly. The ability to filter content in this day and age has become pretty commonplace, I would say. If you're going to be doing any sort of interesting data visualization or using any sort of top website, chances are you have an opportunity to filter out what you are looking for, whether that be a location, a product, some historical context, anything else, anything at all. But the critical piece here is that you can allow for that personalization on mobile and not just on desktop. For a long time, early mobile early mobile websites did not have a lot of the functionality. They were essentially landing pages and just ways for people to learn about a brand and see a good front forward facing. But now people are doing just as much action on their phones. They're trusting the encryption. They are trusting the user interface, and they are trusting that they can do what they want to do on mobile devices. So now you need to be able to provide all of that same functionality both on desktop and on mobile. These next two go hand in hand. Always make things easier, make it as easy as possible, get all the unnecessary stuff out of there. But good onboarding is good for mobile apps. This goes hand in hand with making things easier, because when somebody opens an app for the first time, you want to give them the quick tour. This is the onboarding. So you might recall sometimes you'll download an app or you'll update an app. It's like, hey, we have this new experience. Check it out. And you can like click a button and it shows you a couple of different spots on the site. I think those are always very helpful. Sometimes they're annoying if you end up seeing it a second time. But the onboarding element is really key, especially when you think about you're changing something from what it was before. Think about when Facebook or when Twitter changed their UI, and suddenly the world would go up in flames. Seemingly, there would be huge uproar. But ultimately, nobody would. People would come around, they'd figure it out. But a lot of times, Facebook and Twitter wouldn't give you that onboarding process and say, "Look, we've changed." Whereas today, if that were to happen, they would probably provide that onboarding thing for you, because they know that there's going to be mass confusion, mass hysteria, and they're going to ask why. Why is this different? So the onboarding practices are really good for that. And now the last two, use established gestures and the mobile layout design. And I want to show this here. This image of an individual and how they hold their phone is kind of the standard. There's the old thumb on the front, four fingers behind. And if you look and see what the range of motion is, the typical thing is that you can reach with your thumb to the other side of the phone. You can reach down to the bottom and you can make it about halfway up. Conversely, at the opposite end of the phone, at the top end, is where it's hard to reach when you're one handed and one thumbed working on a cellular device. This is critical for a lot of times when people are surfing the web. And you think about the two instances when, unfortunately, people are often looking for stuff the most, not looking, but just kind of browsing. This could be on social media or on the web. It's generally when they are in the bathroom or when they're in the car. And while neither of those should be peak mobile web surfing times, unfortunately, it's the reality of the truth. And so you need to be able to provide a mobile design, a mobile layout, and a good user experience, assuming that the individual only has their thumb to navigate. So this is a really good menu. And you see here as well, the bottom part of the phone is typically the easiest part to access. Hence the example that we saw earlier, where that bottom horizontal menu was sitting at the bottom of that app. So this is a really important piece, a very important image. If there's one image that I think is the biggest takeaway from this article, it's this one. And to me, it's, it doesn't tell me anything new, but it's a great reminder for me and for everybody else that, hey, people are not using mice anymore. This isn't something where you can easily go to any corner of the page. You are very much limited to how far people can stretch their thumbs when they are going to be surfing the web in these compromising situations. Generally, when people can use two hands on a mobile device, you don't have their full attention. And if you do, they're very, very specific in what they're looking for. You don't need to really focus on what it is that you want them to do. It's more like they know exactly where they're going. They're logging in. They're going to take an action. They're going to log out and they're going to move on. However, this side here, the example with the thumb, is more for the browsing, checking out what's available, what's going on with this site or this app. And so this is a very, very pivotal piece when it comes to this article. The one other thing I did want to, minimal content is also nice. The Google example, which she showed here, I forgot about that before. Last thing here, there's a couple best practices that I did want to quickly mention. One, looking at speed is interesting because, as I mentioned before, a lot of times designers will eliminate a banner image in lieu of faster page loading times, which is fine. I think that's a perfectly acceptable practice. But make sure that that's not the only thing that's slowing down your site. There's a lot of different elements that can slow down a website. Core Web Vitals is a great thing to use through Google that can tell you what all is doing it. Sometimes just too much JavaScript, too much code. Other times, part of it is where they are, location. But sometimes too, it is a combination of these things where there's elements of a web page that need to be downloaded every time that the page loads. And same with an app. And so if you can eliminate that and cache some of that stuff and make it so that users don't have to re-download a fresh page every single time, that's going to help you with your page site speed as well. I'm going to skip over the provide feedback to users because I've talked a little bit about user testing so far. But finally, we have minimized data input. Whenever you're creating a website that has any sort of login or any sort of form fill, make sure that you're using the absolute minimum viable product when it comes to fields. Form fields and forms, there's a time and a place for very specific, long-winded forms with a lot of information. Maybe you're hiring somebody for a job, things like insurance. Some of those things require a lot more information. However, if you are just an e-commerce platform that is just trying to capture information, maybe you're B2B trying to capture some lead information, get what you need in order to follow up with them and have a separate conversation that is more offline. If you can get away with name and email, that's great. If you can get away with name, email, and or just email, that's even better. When I look at the fields that go into forms, especially on mobile designed websites, I rank them into three sections. One is the absolutely necessary one. That's the email. Technically, you don't need anything else if you're trying to use that data somehow. You do need contact information, hence the email. And also, most people have email addresses saved in their browsers, so it's pretty quick. Two is the name and any other close identifying information. Not 100% necessary, but most people think it is so that it can provide for a more intimate, close discussion that happens following that. And also sort of gives people an opportunity to look you up. And then third is the stuff that is identifying information that is very outdated and no longer necessary in order to follow up with a lead or any sort of customer. That is stuff like your phone number, your address, anything else pretty much for a standard form. Again, there are other situations where you're going to need a lot more. But if all you're going to do is follow up with these people, why ask for their phone number? Why ask for an address? You're never going to mail them anything. And if you're going to, then just ask for the address later. You need enough information so that somebody can fill out the form in as short a time as humanly possible. It's not, and I mean, some users are going to go to your site, they're going to see 10 fields and you're like, okay, and they'll still try to fill it out. But the likelihood of them getting stopped and distracted while filling out 10 form fields is a lot higher than how common it is that you get distracted in filling out nothing but an email field. So that's another thing to consider. The conclusion here is nice to check out just as a reminder, but that was about it when it comes to all of this. And if you're designing a portfolio, for example, you're not going to need all of these, but make sure to put together some of these best practices when it comes to a website. Anytime that somebody's putting together a portfolio, whether you're a designer, a developer in social media or any sort of digital marketing, the the way that the site is built is very much a test of the individual. And so if you're ever applying for a job and you have your portfolio on there, make sure that you are really following the best practices and that the hiring manager, whoever it is, who's looking at it is make sure that they're like, wow, this is very sleek. It's crisp, simple. I don't have any issues with it. And that's really the risk that you take with the portfolio is that putting yourself out there in a website to hiring managers or anybody in the public, it's putting more information out there likely is going to paint you in a better light. But at the same time, you're opening yourself up to um, additional complaints, additional concerns. So just make sure to follow these best practices as outlined in Cameron Chapman's article, and you should be okay. So if I missed any, please reach out to me or reach out to Cameron here. And this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. And hopefully you've got a little bit out of it as well. Thank you.